Before this video starts, I'd just like to make an announcement. I have the Liberal Tears mug for $14.99 on my website. It is the first link in the description if you want to go pick one up. Don't worry if it breaks when it comes to your house. I'll send you another one for free out of my pocket. I don't care. I want you to get your Liberal Tear mug. It comes in Liberal Tears white with the face, black with the face, white without the face, and black without the face. So pick whichever one you want, and it'll come to your door in about 3 to 5 days. So that should be epic. First link in the description. Thank you. Let's go on with the video.
We have time for a few questions. Please raise your hand and we'll come to you.
In your opinion, is the current situation on academic campuses a continuation of the influence of the Frankfurt School or a perversion of it?
A continuation. I mean, the Frankfurt School, for people who don't know anything about Frankfurt School philosophy, is a group of philosophers in the 1920s in Germany who were expatriates. They moved to the United States and basically infiltrated American universities with an ideology that suggested, they realized, the Frankfurt School, they realized that Marxism, when Karl Marx wrote Das Kapital, what he was trying to do was describe how he thought society was going to work. It was actually descriptive, not necessarily proscriptive. It was, here's what's going to happen. He thought class warfare would eventually break out and destroy the capitalist infrastructure. When that didn't happen, World War I basically dissuaded the international left of this because there was no class uprising to start World War I. It turned out that poor French people were happy to fight poor German people, and all of them were happy to fight poor Russian people. So when that fell apart, what the Frankfurt School decided is, in order to make this change happen, we can't just wait for this change to happen, we have to change the culture. And the Frankfurt School basically decided to change the culture from the roots out. And in the 60s, what they discovered is that instead of using class, which is difficult, it's difficult to get a poor white guy to sympathize with a poor black guy, instead what they would use as a proxy is racial groups. They would use racial groups to tear down the United States and the capitalist system, suggesting that racial groups are the victims of capitalism. If we can just pose a racial group against a racial group, then that, and mix in a little bit of socialism in there, we'll end up with a more civilized world. Right? And the Soviet Union actually pushed this message in the 60s when it would put out propaganda about how the United States was racist, right? Not how the United States was rich and poor. They didn't talk about income inequality. They talked about how the U.S. was racist and the Soviet Union was a wonderful place for people of all races, when in reality it was just a crap hole for people of all races. Yes, the Frankfurt School, which was led by people like Herbert Marcuse, it was very influential. I don't believe the full-scale conspiracy theory that everybody was taken over by them, but I think that influential thinkers do have influence beyond just the people who read their books. I mean, there's a wave that moves out. And in academia, there's no question that people who don't even know they've been influenced by Frankfurt School ideas have been influenced by Frankfurt School ideas. Just as if you ask most Democrats, you know, do you like Karl Marx, most of them will say no, even though they're buying directly into his philosophy.
I have a question about the alumni of the, say, Ivy, or any goofy schools. Why don't the alumni pinch these schools off? Here is Brown University, for one example, is starting a fund drive for $2 billion. What kind of good are they going to do with that? It's because they've got a bunch of roughnecks and ingrates down there raising hell, and more $2 billion to do some more of that. Thank you very much.
So the question is basically why alumni don't do anything. There are a couple of reasons why alumni don't do anything. The first is that alumni really don't pay that much attention to what's going on at their schools. They sort of see the name on the paper and they say, I went there, it was fun, I enjoyed it, I want to see it continue to succeed. They sign a check. That's really how most alumni deal with it. I know my wife used to do phone banking for UCLA. This is how you got people to give, right? You call them up, you say, you remember how great your experience was at UCLA? We're still doing that for thousands of kids. Give us some money. That's how most alumni actually give. The second reason is that there is a bit of self-interest attached to alumni giving in certain industries, meaning I went to Harvard Law School. Harvard Law School is, depending on who you look at, either the first or second best law school in the nation, right? It's Harvard and Yale, and they always battle it out. If I'm somebody who went to Harvard Law School, then I would prefer that for the next 30-odd years, when I plop down that credential, people say, ooh, right? If Harvard were to drop in the college rankings, in the law school rankings, down to 20, it's not nearly as impressive that I went there. So there's a bit of self-interest attached to the continuing prominence of your school, and so people tend to give for that reason as well. In other words, the real question, and this is a question more broadly, is why people why people let other interests trump ideology, and that's one that, and philosophy of life, and that's, you know, that is the difficulty of American politics and politics in general, is getting people to understand that their own personal self-interest is not necessarily served by the short-term gains to be made if they're undermining the long-term foundations upon which success is based.
Well, it's clear you're definitely up on everything. I'd like to ask you a question, which I will do now. Will Hillary Clinton be indicted?
Will Hillary Clinton be indicted? Well, I'm not a clairvoyant, but I'm going to go no. And the reason I'm going to say no is because the justice system is entirely corrupt at the top levels on behalf of Democrats. And Dinesh D'Souza will spend time in prison, but Hillary Clinton will spend no time in prison. David Petraeus will end up having to make a settlement with the government. Hillary Clinton will not. My indicator, by the way, that she's not going to be indicted is that today Jay Carney came out and said Obama was rooting for Hillary, right? Which is the first real indicator that Obama is backing Hillary in the race. He's not going to endorse her full scale before South Carolina, but even that kind of small signal. The real question now is whether the FBI's investigation is so far that no one can stop them, and I don't buy it. I don't buy it. It's, you know, listen, I hope she's indicted for purposes of justice and, yes, of politics, because I think that she is poised to be one of the most damaging, she's already one of the most damaging politicians in American history. She's the worst Secretary of State ever. But beyond that, she's poised to be the second worst president in American history if she doesn't get indicted. So I'm rooting the same as everybody else for her to get indicted. I don't trust the Loretta Lynch Justice Department to do actual justice. They're too busy cracking down on the Ferguson Police Department.
Hi. I've noticed that this new development with language like safe spaces, for instance, and trigger warnings has taken on a different kind of jargon than previous revolutionary movements. It's really therapeutic, and it's operating on an emotional level. And it seems to be resonating with kids even at the high school and elementary level. I try to talk to my nieces and nephews. It's really evident. There doesn't seem to be a foothold for a logical conversation to happen,
yes,
because emotions seem to completely fill the void. You seem to agree with that. So
totally.
What do you think is creating that environment? Because where I'm seeing it, it's a very difficult thing to even have a conversation.
Yeah. I mean, what's creating the environment of feelings is basically that we're the most prosperous nation in the history of humanity. So, I mean, if you've ever dealt with kids of very wealthy parents, very often they tend to be oversensitive and easily offended, and these are the kids of wealthy parents, namely the United States. And so what are they going to complain about? The fact that they're poor? They're not poor. The fact that they have a rough life? They don't. So what exactly is going to be their world-beating change? And there's nothing more empowering to these kids than saying the change that you seek is about you, right? It's not even about the society at large, it's about you. Because your feelings are now our gauge of success or failure as a society. I mean, that's a pretty empowering message. I mean, it's almost a bizarre leftist incarnation of Walt Whitman's I Contain Multitudes. You know, what happens to me is what happens to all of society. My feelings matter than anything else more than anything else in the universe. Which is why, by the way, when you do argue with kids who are into this sort of stuff, it is imperative to actually use emotional argument. You know, logic does not work. And that doesn't mean that you have to make false arguments, but you can say you're being a fascist little, right? And that's okay. Because the reality is they are being fascist little. And so that's okay. And the reason that is because what they're really doing, what the left now does, is they make emotionally based arguments about your character. You're a bad person, right? The safe space argument, the microaggression argument, isn't that you're even saying something untrue. It's that you are a bad human being. And the only way to defeat you're a bad human being in an argument is to say, no, actually, you're a bad human being for suggesting that I'm a bad human being without evidence. Only a jerk does that. Right? And then once we get beyond the character arguments, then we can argue about logic. But if it's going to be character arguments all the way to the well, then there's no way to beat a character argument with a logical argument. Mitt Romney discovered this in 2012. Right? You cannot make a logical argument and win people over while your opponent is saying that you kill people of cancer. Right? I mean, which was the actual argument against Mitt Romney. He fired people so that later their wives would die of cancer. This is the Obama campaign, and Mitt Romney's campaign was that guy's incompetent. Okay, that's not, so who are you going to vote for? The guy who kills people of cancer with his magic Wall Street powers, or the guy who's mildly incompetent, right? So character arguments do matter, and this is why I encourage conservatives to see the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. Logical arguments are not going to defeat the safe space microaggression mentality. The only thing that defeats that is showing these kids that what they are doing is actually immoral. It's not just ineffective, it's not just counterproductive, it's immoral. It is immoral to call the police if someone hurts your feelings. It makes you a bad human being if you call the police because somebody hurt your feelings. It makes you a fascist thug who wants to use a gun against someone. And when you speak to them like that, at least you can embarrass them enough for just a moment that maybe there's a gap.
I'm going to ask a question on behalf of my daughter and son-in-law. We were visiting them. He's in the military.
Well, thank you.
Over Christmas, and he asked the question, we have 4 kids homeschooled, should we be saving money to send them to college? You've described a situation. He seems to sense that this is maybe not a good place for his kids, but on the other hand, college served him well, his wife. So would you please respond?
So you have to gauge your own kids. I think it's a different, listen, I went to UCLA, I went to Harvard Law. There are no 2 more liberal institutions, leftists. I don't like the word liberal, they're not liberals, they're leftists. There are no 2 more leftist institutions on the planet than UCLA and Harvard Law School. I came out a stronger conservative because I used everything that I was learning as a starter. It wasn't the end point, right? It was, okay, you want me to read John Rawls? Okay, well now I'm going to go and I'm going to read Frederick Hayek, right? I'm going to read various perspectives on the same issue so that I know how to counter the argument. So I can argue leftist positions better than most leftists can, right? So, so if you have somebody who's a solid conservative, what I say to parents is about college, if your kid is not a solid conservative, if your kid doesn't have solid values by the time they're 18, they'll be a leftist by the time they're 21. That's the way that this works. All your heavy lifting is done before the college years. So you sort of have to, I mean, honestly, I think that if your kid isn't solidly ensconced in values before they hit puberty, you're in trouble. So this is a long process. As someone with a 2-year-old daughter and a son on the way, I mean, this is something I'm going to have to work on. It's something that, you know, I think that you have to gauge this. So what I say to college students who are really politically motivated is go to leftist campuses. Go to leftist campuses, learn how to hone your arguments, become a weapon. And what I also tell them is if you're going to be on a leftist campus, don't be stupid. If the professor is going to grade you down for being conservative in class, write like a communist. I mean, this is actually what I did when I was at UCLA. I'd argue with the professor in class, and then we had things called blue books, and blue books were great because they were anonymous. They just used your student ID number. And so if you read my actual essays from college, they read like something directly out of The Nation. And if you know, and obviously that's not what I think, but that's how you get to graduate summa cum laude at UCLA, go to Harvard Law School, and then use all their degrees against them. So.
One of the things that you mentioned in your speech was that sooner or later they're going to have to come out of college and live with the reality of life and making a living and doing these types of things. There's enough kids in the millennial that have now come out of the colleges. How are they faring? What are they doing?
I mean, they're faring poorly. They're shocked. I mean, they're kids who are now suing their colleges. This is an actual lawsuit. Suing their colleges because they're saying, I was promised a job, I was promised an income after I come out of here. Right? The Occupy Wall Street movement was all disenchanted college kids who got out after that lesbian dance theory major and thought they were going to make 6 figures somewhere. And it turns out nobody pays to watch people theorize about lesbian dance. So, you know, so they end up, you know, going and living in tents in Central Park and pooping on themselves. Life is a rough teacher. What the left has tried to do is extend kind of the period of adolescence indefinitely, right? So now you're 26 and you're on your parents' health care, Okay, by age 26, I'd been married for a couple of years, and I was 2 years away from having a kid, and I already had 2 degrees and 4 published books. It turns, and by the way, that's actually, I'm not even a success story if you go back 50 years, right? 50 years by the age of 26, you were supposed to be fully ensconced in your job. You're supposed to have like 3 kids by that point. What we've done is prolonged adolescence indefinitely. And so what Obama's goal is, what the left's goal is, what Bernie Sanders, Hillary, they have the same goal. And the same goal is to extend college out. Right? College is not a place that's kind of a break from reality. College is the new reality. So we have to make all of human life like college. And this is what they think Europe is, which is why Europe is Europe is going to collapse. And it's being invaded by foreign forces, and the barbarians are at the gates. And Europe is going to fall apart, and it is falling apart. So we can play this game, but it's not going to end well. And the problem is that because the education is so poor, instead of reacting against their teachers at college who told them everything was going to be hunky-dory, instead of having the kind of all quiet on the Western Front moment, where the former student goes back to his classroom after World War I, he's in the middle of World War I, he goes back and he yells at his professor and he says, "You're telling all these kids the wrong thing. You're telling them that war's awesome." Instead of them going back and yelling at their professors, they say, "No, it just shows my professor was right because society is unjust." Right? The lack of my $100,000 salary, that's because society is mean, and so we have to transform the society. And that's why young people, again, 40% back speech codes in American life. This is why I think the last poll was nearing or over 40% of young people are okay with socialism, like the actual socialism, because they don't know anything. They've been taught stupidity, and how they feel is all that matters. I mean, there's a video that's going around the internet getting all sorts of play about income inequality. Income inequality is the stupidest issue. Income inequality means nothing. Right? I mean, I have a lot of income inequality with Bill Gates, but I'm doing pretty well, and I don't care that Bill Gates is doing really well. The only thing we should all care about is that there are poor people. We should figure out how poor people can do better, not how to make Bill Gates less rich. But this video is going around and saying, here's a poll of what Americans think the wealth distribution should look like, and here is what the wealth distribution actually looks like. And I watched this video in bewilderment, and young people love it. And I watched this video in bewilderment saying, who told you that you get to tell the universe how wealth is distributed? Right? Who told you that you have a moral say as to how wealth is distributed? It's immoral, it's evil, it's wrong. You're going to have to steal people's labor from them. But people are not told this, and so they think that their own subjective vision of what reality should look like should govern what reality actually looks like, and it's only later, after 80 years of communist failure, that they realize, oh, and hundreds of millions of people dead, that they realize, oh, that was a bad idea. For like 10 years, and then they go right back to it.
Could you please explain the unholy alliance between the left and the forces and the Muslim supremacists, considering that the premises and the principles of both of them are mutually incompatible?
Okay, so they're not mutually incompatible to point A, they are to point B. What I mean is that it's a timeline. The left wants to tear down Western civilization because it thinks it's unequal. The radical Muslims want to tear down Western civilization because they think it's evil. So to the point of tearing down Western civilization, they're pretty much on the same page. It's where they go from there that's a problem. Right? One side wants to build a caliphate and the other side wants to build a communist utopia. The reason that the left is routinely, and it's almost invariable, that the left ends up siding with the world's worst human beings in every situation is because, again, if you just go back to that fundamental leftist principle that equality of outcome is all that matters in life, that equality of outcome means that something just is happening, think about it. The real world is a place where God designed it this way. I believe this. God designed it not for every individual, but certainly for the vast bulk of humanity. If you do responsible, good things with your life, you will be more successful than if you do irresponsible, bad things with your life. Well, if the left believes that people who are unsuccessful are more virtuous, then what that means is that the non-virtuous are more virtuous, right? Because the people who are unsuccessful are generally not doing good, responsible things, and the left says, well, those people are victims, let's help them. Right? So the Muslims in the Middle East are victims of Israel. They must be victims of Israel because Israel's rich, and its neighbors are not. So they must be victims. Well, the real reason the Muslims, the Palestinian Muslims, for example, are poor is because they've spent all the money that has been given to them, hundreds of billions of dollars, all the money that's been given to them over the course of decades, and they've spent it on terrorism, and they've spent it on stocking it away in their bank accounts of Yasser Arafat and Mahmoud Abbas, and they've spent it on garbage, and they spent it on anti-Israel propaganda. That's the real reason they're poor. But the left looks at it and they say, they're poor. That means they're virtuous. This is why I hate it, really despise it, when Republicans do the whole, I'm a better person because I have a rags to riches story. You weren't a better person when you're poor. Okay, no one is a better person just because they're poor. By the way, no one's a better person because they're rich. All that wealth is a measure of how many voluntary exchanges you engaged in a free market. That's all that wealth is. But the idea for the left is that all inequality is evil. Therefore, the people who are unequal at the top are evil, and the people at the bottom are virtuous. Which is why you'll hear people on the left say things like they like small business, but they hate people who are big business, like the Walmart family, right? The Walton family. They're terrible. Well, were they terrible when they were just a family living in the middle of nowhere? When exactly did they transition over into evil? Right? When they became successful enough, because their success meant, by necessity, according to the leftist worldview, they were depriving others of their fair share. And Bernie Sanders said this right after winning New Hampshire the other night. And this is Bernie Sanders' entire thing. He says, the principle of America is the principle of fairness, which makes me want to vomit and never stop vomiting. The principle of America is not fairness of outcome. And he was talking about fairness of outcome. He said, oh, it's unfair that 1% of the population lives with more wealth than 90% of the rest of the population. And well, maybe, or maybe it's not unfair, because it turns out that 1% of the population is hiring the other 90% of the population to actually provide their services and labor.
We have time for one more question.
Hi, Mr. Shapiro. I'm a community college teacher, and so I pay union dues to the CTA and the NEA, and as you can imagine, I'm not real happy about that.
Don't let them get a hold of this tape. You're going to blur out his face. And
no, I'm worried. Do you have any hope? I believe the Supreme Court recently heard oral arguments, Friedrichs versus CTA. Mm-hmm. Any hope that that might come out?
Yeah. I mean, there is hope that that might come out the right way. It really depends on, whether Justice Kennedy had a solid bowel movement in the morning. I mean, basically, I mean, all Supreme Court arguments basically boil down to this vital question of whether he took his Metamucil. Justice Kennedy theoretically has an overriding philosophy of what he thinks of as individual liberty. So anything that allows you to do more stuff on your own is something we should allow. So he was in favor of gay marriage because it allows gay people to get married. He's in favor. He's against campaign finance reform because he thinks people should be allowed to spend money on politics. So presumably, theoretically, he could vote the right way on this case, saying teachers should be allowed not to have to give their money to a union that uses that money to push certain political causes, which is what the case is about. So it's possible that Justice Kennedy comes out the right way. I hate that we live in a system where we have to wait for the Qadi on the Hill to dictate to us what our lives are going to be like in perpetuity. It's disgusting to me. It's a perversion of the constitutional order. I mean, I wrote at Harvard Law School, I wrote my entire Harvard Law School third-year paper on the idea that Madison versus Marbury is wrongly decided. That Marbury versus Madison is wrongly decided. That basically the Supreme Court should not have the power of judicial review because the founders didn't believe any human beings should be invested with that much authority to destroy the Constitution if they saw fit. And in fact, Hamilton clearly writes in its Federalist 78, he talks specifically about how if the court should start to exercise will over constitutionalism, over basic philosophy of government, then it's betrayed its entire purpose. So it's sad to me that conservatives have been relegated to waiting around. And by the way, this is why the saddest thing to me of all about this election is that if we lose this election, or if Donald Trump wins the election, if any of these things happen, if conservatives lose the election, there are at least 2 justices who are probably going to step down, maybe 3 or 4, in the next 4 to 8 years. And so we could be living under the rule of Elena Kagan, who I know, and she is not someone whose rule you really wish to be living under. So, well, I guess that's all we have time for, but thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Oh, what's up? What are you doing here? I'm protesting Donald Trump. Okay. Why do you dislike Donald Trump? He's racist, sexist, homophobic, go down the list. Xenophobic. He's embodying kind of just every horrible aspect of this country's very dark history. I consider myself a very patriotic person, and I think Donald Trump is un-American, and he's anti-American at his core. If you're racist and sexist and against immigration, then you have no idea, you're clueless about what America's like, and I don't have time for that. I don't have patience for that. I'm not cool with it, and I'm saying something about it. So that's my spiel.
Can you give people some specific examples of, people who are on the other side, people who like Trump, who are like, he's not racist, he's not sexist. Could you give them some examples to prove your point?
Of stuff Trump has said?
Stuff he said, stuff he's done, anything.
The least of it that I could think of is what was the tweet with him with the taco bowl picture saying, I love the Hispanics or something like that, which is an incredibly insensitive thing to say and just completely tone deaf. The things he said about building a border wall, and making Mexico pay for it. His stance on it's not about following the law. His stance on illegal immigration, it's about keeping non-white people out of America, as far as I can tell from the rhetoric that he's using. I honestly don't listen that much to what Donald Trump says, and frankly, I just don't want to hear it half the time. But from what I do hear on the news and online, and from people who do, follow what he says, I'm not cool with it. I'm not happy with it.
Who do you support?
I personally support Bernie Sanders, but I will vote for whoever's the Democratic nominee. I'm not.
So if Hillary gets it, you'll vote for Hillary?
I would rather she didn't. I have my personal. I have my own reasons to dislike Hillary Clinton, but I'll take her over Trump. I'll take I'll take someone we know over someone who's clearly, frankly, evil and who's and he's not a politician. I asked my father, was this what it was like when Ronald Reagan was running for president in 1980, and he said no, because Ronald Reagan was actually a politician. Donald Trump he's a reality star. He's a billionaire who made all of his money either from inheritance or from flipping houses here in Jersey. Atlantic City is screwed partly because of him, and I'm not having what he's about here. So yeah, I'll take Hillary Clinton over that. I'd prefer Bernie Sanders, but this election so far has been kind of a circus. So I'm just hoping that it's not Trump. Yeah.
So if Trump is racist for the rhetoric, sexist for his rhetoric, what about Hillary? What about Hillary covering up for Bill Clinton, abuse of women? What do you think about that?
Oh yeah, no, that's pretty egregious on her part. I condemn that. I'm not cool with that. That's pretty blatant. I remember reading something about that, and that's pretty blatant. And I hope that comes back to get her, just on the basis that karma comes around. I don't. As far as Donald Trump goes, there are allegations against Donald Trump from his ex-wife that are analogous, I guess. So that's not cool either. Again, I'm here because not Trump. I'm not really here because of Hillary or Bernie or whatever. But that's.
Do you think that at the DNC close by, you're going to go?
The DNC? I don't know. That depends. That depends on my schedule at that time. I might, but that really depends on when it is and what I got going on at that time.
Well, let's say Bernie doesn't get it. You think it's going to get pretty crazy there? Think there's going to be rioting?
I hope not. I seriously doubt it. I think there's a lot of mixed information coming out in Nevada about what went down at their Democratic convention, and that disappoints me a lot. I was at a Bernie Sanders rally in New Brunswick a few weeks back, and Bernie Sanders supporters are not like that. They're not violent people. They're very happy to gather and talk about their opinions and share their opinions. I mean, a lot of people here are Bernie supporters and they're very angry, but that's part of the point of why we're here. I don't think anything like that is going to go down in Philadelphia, and I certainly hope it doesn't.
I was at the the Trump rally protest in California, where we saw, spray painting the signs of the city, beating people up, What would you say to people who you know, they see those videos and they go, well, people say Trump supporters are violent. What about Bernie supporters? They seem pretty violent in those, you know, certain instances.
I mean, a lot of it is like social media today, and a lot of mass media today. It's very personalized in a way. You can pick and choose what sources you get your information from. So if you're a Bernie Sanders supporter, you can pick and choose the information that, you know, supports him. If you're a Donald Trump supporter, you can pick and choose the information that supports him. Same with Hillary. All I'm going to say is that I don't have a clear idea of what's going on as far as the violence with Bernie Sanders supporters and Trump supporters. The Trump supporters violence I have seen on news. I've seen footage of it, so I believe it's a real thing. The Bernie Sanders supporters violence, I haven't seen any footage from what I've experienced with Bernie Sanders supporters. I haven't seen any of that kind of violence, anything even resembling kind of any kind of hateful rhetoric. There's a lot of anti-Hillary Clinton sentiment, but I don't think any of it is rooted in a hatred of her specifically so much as a political system that doesn't represent people. Like I said before, I'd probably vote for Hillary Clinton if she was the Democratic nominee, but that's because I don't really have another choice. If it's between her and Trump, then I'll take her. But I don't really want to have to pick. You know, I don't want to have that choice to make. I'd like to vote for someone who I want to vote, not the lesser evil.
Hello, everyone. Hey, I'm just stopping by to remind you that liberals are insane. Social justice warriors are becoming more violent and triggered than ever before. Anyways, be sure to subscribe to KGP TV on YouTube and have a blessed day. Yeah, man.